For thousands of years, alien-like creatures have been seen. They may have played an extravagant role in what is now ancient history's religion, culture, and daily life.
Ancient Sumerians believed that they were created to be a slave species meant to mine for gold and other valuable resources. The people who supposedly created the Sumerians were the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki means those of royal blood. Those of royal blood were created by Anu, who was the sky god.
The Anunnaki were mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Anunnaki were judges of the underworld who were there to determine your fate. It remains unclear, but it is believed that the Anunnaki set fire to all of Sumer in an act of punishment. How is it possible that something can set fire to all of Sumer? The Anunnaki were not normal people. They possessed extreme power, and the ability to create a human race almost seems impossible. Why would the Sumerians call the Anunnaki those of royal blood? How would something set fire to all of Sumer, and since when do gods have a home planet? And the fact that they are the son of the god of the sky seems to conclude the theory that the Anunnaki were in fact extraterrestrials. The strange thing about these gods or angels is that when they were asked from where they were from, they would never point across an ocean, but they would always point in the sky.
Let us assume that the home planet of the Anunnaki, Nibiru, doesn't actually exist due to modern astrological observations. If this planet didn't exist, why would the ancient Sumerians believe there was something in the sky? What if we looked at this in a different perspective? What if the planet Nibiru wasn't a planet in the sky, but an observatory for the Anunnaki to study the humans?
Another piece of evidence to further my speculation that ancient Sumerians were visited by aliens is that the Anunnaki were often depicted as giants. If the Anunnaki came from another planet that had a much larger gravity force than ours, they would be big compared to humans.
What remains unclear is whether the Anunnaki were subjects of folktale or extraterrestrials. One of the most bizarre cases of alien transportation put into human hands were the Vimanas in ancient India.
In several texts dating back to 6,000 years ago, there were many references to a flying machine called a Vimana. In Indian poems, Vimanas were said to leave burn marks on the ground when they took off. Vimanas were believed to be controlled by thought, a technology just being developed by the U.S. Air Force.
According to the Vimanika Shastra, or science of aeronautics, the Vimanas were powered by propulsion based on a combination of gyroscopes, mercury, and electricity. This is possible when mercury is placed on a gyroscope and electrified. Scientists have found it to give off an extremely bright light, much like modern-day UFO encounters.
Many ancient temples of Hinduism located in India are shaped in what are believed to be Vimanas. This is most likely because the Vimanas were given to the Hindu people. By making the towering and beautiful temples pointed to the sky, it is believed to be a thank you to the gods who gave them the Vimanas.
The gods of Hinduism gifted this aircraft to the Hindu people. Some of these gods had gray skin, just like extraterrestrials as we know them. What we're talking about isn't some pitiful airplane, it's an ancient UFO. As great as these Vimanas may sound, being able to transport ancient people like no other, they were also said to have been used in many epic air battles that killed many people and completely decimated cities.
These Vimanas possessed great power and very futuristic possibilities that even the Air Force of the United States still hasn't completely grasped. The next thing we'll be diving further into is the Easter Island oddity. One of the strangest group of structures of uncertain history is the Easter Island heads. The heads are set up all around the island. These heads are called the Maui.
The Maui were believed to be constructed in a quarry on Easter Island around 1250 to 1500 AD. There are a total of 887 of these heads scattered across the island. Most of them are complete, but some remain unfinished in the quarry. When the Indonesian people inhabited this area, they claimed it to have already been inhabited by people known as the Long-Ears. The Long-Eared people proved to be very strong and strategic and enslaved the Indonesian people among their arrival. The Indonesians were forced to construct these heads. It seems that either the Long-Eared people got frail and ill, or let their guard down because the Indonesian people overthrew them, putting an abrupt end to the sculpture making.
No evidence has been found linking the long-eared people to any other culture or nationality in the world. Some ancient astronaut theorists believe that the long-eared people inhabited Easter Island long before any other people.
What if the long-eared people were actually extraterrestrials? This would explain how they easily enslaved the Indonesian people, and how they fell ill to the Indonesian people's diseases.
When the Indonesians came, the extraterrestrials may have taken advantage of them and made them create sculptures of themselves to mark their territory. Much like War of the Worlds, it is believed that the long-eared people fell because of diseases that the Indonesian people brought with them.
In many ancient Egyptian paintings, there are depictions of rulers and kings that had elongated skulls. There is one king, named King Akhenaten, who was believed to descend from the heavens in 1382 BC.
The physical features of King Akhenaten were extremely strange. He had an elongated skull, long neck, long fingers, sunken eyes, and inverted knees. All of the portraits of King Akhenaten show his elongated skull. As the 18th king of Egypt, he instituted a series of radical religion changes. He banned the current Egyptian polytheism and substituted it with the monotheistic worship of the Aten. The Aten was a silver sun in the sky that watched over the Egyptians.
King Akhenaten claimed to be the son of Aten, and all should worship Aten. King Akhenaten fathered King Tut. After a time, Egyptian citizens rebelled against the monotheistic worship of Aten and returned to polytheism. King Akhenaten was forced to flee Egypt with his followers.
It is possible that King Akhenaten was a human-alien hybrid. There are two reasons to this belief. One being the uncanny resemblance of King Akhenaten to gray aliens, and the other being the fact that King Akhenaten forced the Egyptians to worship a silver sun, which may or may not have been a UFO.
A more modern-day UFO and alien abduction encounter was the Betty and Barney Hills case. Alien abduction cases have been ufologists' prime study for the past 6 years. All alien abduction cases usually have things in common, including the experimentation done and what the aliens looked like. One of the most famous cases was Betty and Barney Hills. It occurred on September 17th and 18th, 1961.
Betty and Barney Hill were on vacation in Niagara Falls and decided to leave at night to drive home to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, because a hurricane was heading up the eastern seaboard. While on their car ride home, Betty spotted a metallic disc in the sky. Completely disregarding it as a plane, Barney kept on driving. A bit later, Barney decided to stop at a park and walk their dog. He brought his binoculars along to examine the trailing spacecraft. He glanced through his binoculars to find the plane to be a disc-like object with wings that went upwards. The side of the craft was pointing towards him, and it had a window. Inside the windows were strange beings with big heads and large eyes. In the middle of the creatures stood a taller creature with a black jumpsuit on. A strange feeling flooded over Barney that he knew this person was the leader.
The next events were recalled very hazily by Betty and Barney Hills. They remember driving home in a hurry after seeing the UFO and realizing that their trip took an extra 2 hours when they got home. They had no idea how their trip took an extra 2 hours. Betty started having nightmares several nights after this incident. The nightmares were always the same. They were of Betty being experimented on by the creatures that Barney had described. The leader was there and kept telling Barney that everything was going to be okay. Soon enough, Betty and Barney decided to go see a hypnotist to find out what really happened that night.
The first few hypnotists declined Betty and Barney Hill's request because they thought that the results would be too traumatizing for Betty and Barney. Betty couldn't take no for an answer and decided to see one of the world's best hypnotists. This hypnotist was named Benjamin Simons, and he accepted Betty's request. Betty and Barney were put into separate rooms and put into a hypnotic trance.
Barney first recalled going down the highway and being guided off the road by the aliens that he had seen earlier through the binoculars. He was guided into a UFO in the woods and was put into a paralytic trance. The next thing he remembered was being strapped to a table. The creatures took many samples of his blood and tissue. When they were finished, they guided him back to his car. Betty's story was much more complex than Barney's. She remembered being guided off the road by the extraterrestrials. She also remembered being put under paralysis and awakening on the table. The aliens also took tissue samples from her. What happened next was different from Barney. Betty started to get very scared and started to panic. The alien with the black jumpsuit on came in and spoke with Betty, but didn't actually talk. The leader communicated telepathically with Betty. The leader kept telling Betty it was going to be fine. When that didn't work, the leader guided Betty into a room with a map. It had many dotted joints on it. Betty asked if she could keep it, but when the leader said she couldn't, Betty started crying and screaming again. She was put into a paralytic trance and brought back to the car.
When they arrived in their car, they both regained consciousness. The dots on the paper were recalled by Betty during hypnotism, and they are believed to represent the Zeta Reticuli constellation. It is likely that the reason Betty was shown this constellation was because it was a way of saying, "Come find us."
The most well-documented UFO case was the Bentwaters incident. This incident took place in southeastern England in late December 1980. In this time period, Britain had very high tensions with Russia, and guards were posted all over RAF Bentwaters in case of a Spetsnaz invasion.
On a high alert night, the other guards and I were posted all over the airfield. We saw a bright light hovering over the warehouse where the nuclear weapons were stored. We rushed in after the light left and found that the nuclear weapons to be disabled.
All across the world, UFOs have been seen hovering over nuclear weapon devices. Many times the bombs have been found to be disabled.
A few nights later, a few of my buddies were patrolling the area around the airfield. We got a call saying we have to report to a farm where a possible airdrop was in process. When we arrived, many other soldiers were waiting there too. We stood for a possible 5 minutes, then a bright light appeared on the ground. A blinding light then flooded our vision. When we were able to see again, an egg-shaped object was in the ground, and 3 alien-like creatures emerged from it. They seemed to hover and examine us. When they seemed to finish, they went back into the spacecraft, and a blinding flash of light followed. When it died down, the egg-shaped object was gone. We then reported back to base. We were debriefed separately, and each of us were told a different number of creatures that emerged from the spacecraft, so if anyone leaked information, the government could easily trace it back. The other soldiers and I discussed what we thought actually happened, and came to a conclusion that 3 aliens came from outer space. The stress that impacted upon some soldiers was dreadful. A soldier from Alabama killed himself in fear. Other soldiers were told that they had their retinas burned from the bright light.
Many soldiers from the night of the Bentwaters incident told others about what happened. The Bentwaters incident is almost indefinite proof that extraterrestrials have come to visit the human race. There are many arguments to alien existence, but the most popular one is the question of transportability. Kevin Romeo thinks he might have a possible way aliens may be transported from one place to another in such a quick period of time.
A wormhole is a very basic idea. Imagine you were an ant and you wanted to get from one end of a paper to another the quickest way possible. The quickest way would be to fold the paper in half and go through the center. Creating a wormhole through space has been deemed impossible. impossible, based on modern science, because too much dark energy would be needed. If you opened a wormhole and went through it, chances are you would get trapped in the fabrics of the universe because it is almost impossible to harness the dark energy. There is another approach, however. The universe is made up of 11 known dimensions. To enter these dimensions, there has to be a way out of our own. The only possible way is to manipulate the gravity by using KK gravitations in a particle collider. A mini black hole would be created. The black hole would enable the ship to go through multiple dimensions, also known as the bulk, which would shorten the distance and diminish the impact of time. By passing through the bulk, it would be like going through the Alpha Centauri, our closest galaxy, in 25 minutes. That's it.
From the ancient Sumerians to the Betty and Barney Hills case, there is overwhelming evidence to support the existence of extraterrestrials.
There still remains one unanswered question that no scientist but you can solve. Do you believe?